All right.
All right. Welcome to Author2Author for Austin Through the Ages. My name is LL Diamond. I'm also called Leslie. Well, I am called Leslie. And this is Karen M Cox, the wonderful author of a lot of books. I know she's been doing this for quite some time. 1932, Find Wonder in All Things. There's a number of them. Those are just the two I can name off the top of my head.
Yeah, I could write a
Several,
book.
true. That's Emma, I believe.
hmm
So yeah, a couple of
Undeceived
awards under your belt. So I
Undeceived
guess I'm sorry. What were you going to say?
and Undeceived and then Son of a Preacher Man.
That's right. And then you
Those-
had Georgiana's story from 1932, The
mhm,
Journey Home.
Yeah,
Something like that. Yeah.
that's just it's a novella. It's not very long.
Yeah, but it's good. I've read that one. I like that one. I like it a lot. So
Whenever
anyway,
whenever I think of her with in that book, I think of Joanne Woodward, young Joanne Woodward, and young Paul
Paul
Newman
Newman. I can see that.
for the sheriff. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that.
Mm.
So anyway, let's get going. So you have a number of books all spread out over different time periods. So when you start, how do you start? Is it an initial story, a complete story arc? What's your inspiration?
It's almost never, I don't think it has ever been a complete story arc. Um, and it seems to be different for each book. Like for 1932, that was, we had actually that year, that was written in like 2009, I think, when I posted it. So it's what, 12 years ago. We had
Yeah.
this really big ice storm here, and our power went out for about a week. And so we were trying to get like keep warm and clean and fed and
Yeah.
doing generators and taking ice off of things and so I started thinking about how my grandmothers had talked about what it was like to live a long time ago and all the conveniences that we have now that we didn't used to have. And so I was like, gosh, that must have been so hard. And I said, what would this have been like? And then it just sort of, because I was reading a lot of Pride and Prejudice fan fiction at the time, it all kind of gelled, that, hey, that might be a nice way to, you know, adapt that story, because there would be class differences between someone who was suffering in the Great Depression, someone who was kind of doing okay. And so that it was sort of analogous to the class differences with Darcy and Elizabeth in the Regency time. So that was where that one came from. Fine Wonder it was Laurel. I mean, she just like appeared out of the mist in my head, and she said, I said, "What's your name?" in my head to her, right? Because that's
Yeah.
what crazy authors do. And she said, Laurel, Mountain Laurel. Actually, my dad named me after a wildflower. And I said, "Well, I bet he's interesting." And
Yeah.
she just sort of laughed. And I thought, she's so much like Anna Elliot. And there it was. There it was. Everything was based around her. With I could write a book. I just really wanted to do an almost direct adaptation of Emma.
Hmm.
So I used the plot points more in that one than I did. It's a little closer to canon, I think, as far as what happens when and the role that the characters play. I didn't mess with that as much. With Undeceived, that's probably the closest thing that I've ever done to a plot-driven book.
Okay.
And I'm gonna turn my phone off.
That's okay.
People, it's the late afternoon, and people are gonna start texting me. My mom, my daughter. so,
My grandfather
uh,
passed away, so
so anyway, I know that's gonna happen, so I'll just go ahead and turn it off. Um, where was I? Oh, Undeceived is more plot driven. Actually, my husband came up with that idea. He
oh,
said he said, you know what you ought to do? You ought to mash up No Way Out, that movie No Way Out with Sean Young and Kevin Costner,
yeah.
with Pride and Prejudice. That would be great. And then whenever I would ask him questions, he'd be like, I don't know, I'm not a writer.
Probably a better idea. My husband keeps telling me Sons of Anarchy, and I'm going, Sons of Anarchy is Hamlet fan fiction. So you want me to take Hamlet fan fiction and use Pride and Prejudice fan fiction? It doesn't work that way.
No, no.
1932, in some ways, was rather canon driven. Like there is something that corresponds to canon throughout
Mhm.
the entire book.
Yeah, I guess probably the biggest departure is that they marry after that
Right.
first proposal. I mean, I hope I'm not spoiling that for anybody, but I feel like a lot of people have read. It's been around a while. A lot of people have read it, and so I took a little bit of liberties with that because
Right.
sort of the question with 1932 was what would happen with Elizabeth? What would she do if she really were in dire circumstances?
Hmm.
What would she actually do in that case? Would she say, "Oh, yeah, I could live with that," even if she didn't like him? But the other thing was that Darcy, I think, changes in that setting and in that time period because he's also, I mean, he isn't suffering by any means, but he has had some personal,
Hmm.
suffering, and he everyone around him. My husband's grandmother said to me once, back in the Great Depression, we didn't really worry about being poor. Everybody was poor.
Yeah.
We didn't even really think about it. And I thought, since his community is small and a lot of people are, have on fallen on hard times, that he would be a different person too. And because of Georgiana and her children, he's a different person,
Right.
not quite as haughty, maybe.
Yeah, and they did because I mean, I can remember my grandmother had these long kitchen towels that had that feel of
Hmm.
like the flour sacks. They're
Hmm.
very, very worn. Everything was worn out. So yeah, I liked 1932, and there were a lot between my mother's stories and my grandmother's that I always could find in there.
Hmm.
So when you're looking at all of these time periods, how do you prepare to write a time period other than, modern? You're like
Hmm.
1932 or any of the others. Is there anything particular you want to know about, the time period, the politics of the day or whatever before you start? Or do you usually like hone in on one thing?
I don't. Let's see. Well, it's different because it's different time periods. Like with Find Wonder and All
Right.
Things, I lived through that time period, and some to some degree, with I could write a book. I lived through that time period, so I had a little bit of knowledge about it, and also Undeceived. But Undeceived was probably the one that I did the most research for. It took me forever because I hadn't written a spy novel before.
Mhm.
Um, I don't even read the genre very much. And I read things like, I have a Pinterest board, I think, that has a lot of my resources and stuff on it. So I read books, I read nonfiction books about spycraft. I read a novel by, of course, now the name is gone, but I read not a couple of novels, but I didn't read I read them for, it's a different kind of reading, I think. When
Mhm.
you're reading it for
Technicality.
pieces, yes, pieces of information, whereas as opposed to reading it for story.
Hmm.
So I did that. I found some great documentaries. I watched some TV shows like The Americans. Is that the name? With Carrie, what's her name, with the long hair, and the guy that plays Darcy in Death Comes to Pemberley.
Okay, I know who you're talking about with him, but I'm horrible at names. So,
Well, I am
was
too,
it Carrie
and getting
Mulligan?
worse all the time.
Yeah, was that Carrie Mulligan?
Carrie Russell,
Russell.
Carrie
Okay,
Russell.
yep,
Yeah,
totally different Carrie.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that was a TV show where they're spies in the U.S., Russian spies in the U.S.
Mhm.
And then I found a documentary that really helped me so much. With It was about life in East Germany on YouTube,
Mhm.
of all places. And so I watched this, big long 4 6 hour document, and I'm
Yeah.
taking notes. So I did do a lot of research prep for that. The thing I'm working on now, I'm going to have to do some research prep for that because it's Regency, and I've never written Regency before, at least not in any extensive sort of way. So, but I'll get by with a little help from my friends, I think. So,
That.
Uh, yeah. Um, so yeah, I'm
I
trying to
mean,
think. So yeah, it just depends. Like with Undeceived, I started kind of with the plot. With Fine Wonder and All Things, I started with her. With Son of a Preacher Man, I started with a conversation at AHA, which was how bad could you make Lizzie and still make her be Lizzie? How bad?
oh, that sounds like one of those chat conversations.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But then I got to where it was all about Billy Ray. So then I ended up putting it in first person for Billy Ray.
Okay. Did a lot of your grandparents' stories make it into 1932? Was that something where it was a lot, or was that more research based than stories you'd heard?
Um, so it was based on. It's not based. My grandparents were about that age, and actually, their names were William and Elizabeth.
Oh, fun.
But that's just a coincidence.
Yeah.
They aren't. I mean, the characters aren't anything like my grandparents, and the
Right.
stories. I the Georgiana story was similar because I had a great aunt who was married to a bigamist.
Oh wow.
And then she went away and then she came back. So that was, I mean, I don't even remember the woman's name now. I mean, I have, my dad's one of eight, and my mom's one of five.
Yeah.
So, I mean, my family's huge. And yeah, you're the same. Yeah. Um, so, so yeah, that kind of made, there was something from my real life and Find Wonder. It was that first scene when they're in the when they ride the boat into the cave in the lake. I did that when I
Oh,
was,
okay.
yeah. Find Wonder takes place near where I grew up, so it or for like my teenage years. So that's that kind of stuff I knew. Um,
Yeah, it makes it easy when you've been there and you can maneuver. It's I find it much easier in some ways. Sometimes you still need a map,
mhm.
but yeah, no, it does. It's easy. That personal connection helps.
Yeah. Yeah, and I find that I have to as far as preparation, I have to see the place. There's something about, I mean, I need to see a movie or a document, and I know movies are just a very thin slice of a place, but
Mhm.
or a documentary or photos or maps, or I need to kind of put myself in that world, because when I write, I'm watching it in my mind's eye. And
Mhm.
I mean, not first. That's not the first thing that I do. The first thing I do usually is figure out the dialogue and write dialogue, and then I go back in and fill that stuff in. So sort of like I layer it on, dialogue, then setting, and then transitions, and then proofing, um, to kind of make it all sing.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of doing it. I think just all of us, our brains work so different. It's
Mm,
interesting when you come across someone who does that. So you mentioned the dialogue. Obviously, that's somewhat of an outline to you in a certain respect. Like you'll write a chapter, but do you end up completely outlining and creating plot points for yourself? Now you're a seat by your pants.
no, I'm really not that either.
Okay.
I do this kind of rough outline, I guess you could call it.
Okay.
And I've been trying with this new book because it's so character driven. I have been it's about a Bennett brother.
Hmm.
So I have been using some of the activities or tasks or whatever in Story Genius. Have you ever heard
Hmm.
of that book?
No, I don't.
Lisa Cron. Anyway, there's a lot of things about building character driven stories. So as I've been kind of going through and kind of doing those exercises as I've been going, I'm always kind of looking for different stuff that I can do to improve my story craft. And like I'll try different stuff all the time.
Well, I
um,
know the last time there was an interview with you that I had seen, it was you had just gotten into deep point of view,
mhm.
and that was really interesting. I actually I try. I think that one's always one where you try. You still have to have someone who points and goes, no, no,
Yeah.
without purpose.
Mhm.
Do you still do a lot of deep point of view?
um
You know, I know that's more of a
yeah, I guess I do. I think I just sort of write that way.
Oh,
Um, and so I don't really focus on it very much, but I think that I've sort of been trained by editors and trained myself and beta readers to
yeah.
kind of write that way. Um, but yeah,
Yeah, I can
gosh,
see
I've
that.
forgotten what I even said about deep point of view.
You gave the, I think it's How to Rivet Your Readers. It was like a pamphlet or something. And
Oh, okay,
I
yeah.
was curious, and I went and checked it out. And then
Uh-huh.
my editor was like, "Hey, do you want to try it?" And so, and it's something I think I relaxed with it because I had gotten to where she really didn't have to prompt me that much. And then
Mhm.
something came up in a book a while back, and she was like, she made some comment, and then I think I pulled back a little. And so now with this one, she's like, "You're telling," and I'm like, "No, no, 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 no."
Mhm.
So yeah, then I have to go back and oh, I don't want to rewrite this whole
Yeah.
thing.
Don't you find though that you kind of have to show and then tell a little?
You do. It's
Show
really
and then tell, show and then tell. Because otherwise, I mean, if you do like that all the time, your readers are like, "Ooh, right." I mean,
and
it's just
there's
kind of a
a lot
roller
of
coaster.
questions. You'd end up, I think I would end up with questions every paragraph,
Mhm.
trying to, did he do this? Did he,
Yeah.
stuff
It's
like
like you
that.
gotta give them a break, from all that really intense stuff, and it kinda makes the story, I think, flow a little bit. I don't
Yeah.
know, but
Well,
that's
and there's times like when you're setting up a scene and you're, the candlelight glitter, you are showing to an extent, but it's also telling what the scene looked like because you
Mhm.
can't, there's no other way to do it than to just pretty much tell you what it is. The one that came up recently was, and it's not that my editor expected me to do this, but that she said they say you shouldn't even use filter words in dialogue, and I'm going, that would make for some awkward dialogue at times because you could say you made me feel like, well, no, you can't use feel.
Mhm.
I mean, she was like, I don't buy this one. I'm like, cool, I don't either. Let's keep going.
Yeah. Yeah, dialogue's completely different than
Yeah.
narration, yeah.
Yeah, when when you get into the dialogue, it could make for some really awkward dialogue if you tried to
Mhm.
do that.
Yeah.
But so I think we've actually discuss canon because I did have a question. How much do you consider canon in when you write? And we did cover a bit of which ones were closer to canon than others, but do you consider canon a lot when you write, or
I consider canon as far as how the plot points that will elicit those reactions in the characters.
okay?
So, I'm trying to think of a specific example. Like, give me a plot point and I'll from somewhere. Give me a plot point from somewhere.
From somewhere, like
Yeah.
what, like Pride and Prejudice or one of your books, or
Or I was thinking about one from Emma. Well, I mean,
I'm like you put me on the spot.
come on, give me a plot point. Well, that's because I can't come up with one off the top of my head, um, but yeah, I mean, what I did particularly with I Could Write a Book was I thought that I think of Emma as sort of like a modern girl in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
So I thought that'll be pretty. I mean, that's a pretty straight translation, from
Yeah,
the way Emma's personality is then to the way, but she could even maybe express it more. Um, and then I thought the 1970s would be because there's so much cultural change, and she could be this woman of the. I mean, she's just so full of faux pas and mess
yeah,
ups, and so she thinks she knows everything, and so she's going to be this big modern woman, but she's really not in a lot of ways. And I remember Claudine and I had this big long discussion about whether or not she was a modern woman and in my book, in my
mhm,
Emma in my book, and I'm like, well, she thinks she is, but she's still pretty traditional. I mean, she's
yeah,
because of her life circumstances, she ends up in a pretty traditional kind of life. And when you think about it, it's the Harriet character, the Mary Jo Smith, who's really the modern woman. She's the one with the moves away and does gets a job somewhere and is looking for it. She's single, and in a
yeah.
lot of ways she's the Mary Tyler Moore of the crew, not Emma. Even though Emma thinks that she's really modern. Um, so yeah, I mean, yes, the plot points are there, but they're modified to fit the time
Mhm.
because, like for example, persuasion's really hard to adapt to a modern time. Um, I really struggled a lot with that with Laurel, with Anne. And what I decided was, instead of having, because Anne has all these Regency constraints on her behavior.
Mhm.
And so what I decided instead was to make, rather than this societal pressure on her, to make it more about her own personality and her family dynamics. Those were the things, in her isolation, where she lived, and those were the things that made her, not talk to, not respond to James, not, you know, what made
Mhm.
her dump him at the beginning, in the first part of the story. So yeah, I think you have to, when you do modern adaptations, you have to kind of tweak the plot points and the situations, but what you have to do is keep the characters traits intact, and you have to find plot points that are sort of analogous to bring out those reactions in the characters. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You give that a lot more thought than like. I might pick the plot point, but not necessarily do quite the character's personality. Like I
Hmm.
did the persuasion one, but yeah, she wasn't an Anne Alley. I
Uh-huh.
had too much fun with her.
Yeah, Anne
But
Elliot is tough. I mean, she's to
yeah,
adapt her just the way she is. I'll be real interested to see what they do with this new movie, how they do that.
I can see that. I mean, it was really easy, and like when we went to Bath as a family, we stayed in this flat that was at the end of Camden Crescent, and it was just kind of right nestled at the, because it has that hill that kind of comes down and it's nestled underneath, so you have to go down the stairs, and you had to walk that hill up Lansdowne every day. And I had this modern persuasion. I've never written it, but I had this modern persuasion in my head where she's living in that little flat, the base
Uh-huh.
of Camden, and I just trudging up that hill every day.
Yeah.
But yeah, I haven't tried to write her quite within those constraints though. Like,
The only one I think that would be harder would be Fanny Price.
ooh, I don't know. I don't know that I'd ever want to write her. I don't dislike her. I know a lot
I
of people do, but I can't imagine adapting her.
I have one.
It doesn't.
It's in there. I don't know if I'll ever have the guts to write it, but I mean, as far by guts, I mean not that it would be controversial or anything like that. Even though I don't know, it might be, but just to take it on because it's my least favorite novel.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Crawfords would be rather easy to adapt, but
Mm-hmm.
Fanny herself, as well as is it Edmund? Why am I blanking?
Yeah, Edmund. I mean, and that's the other thing is that Edmund is, I don't
Yeah,
really like him
he's
that
kind of
much.
he's kind of dry.
Hmm.
And the fact that he was so distracted by Mary Crawford for a while was just kind of, and seemed rather out of character in some respects.
Hmm.
But anyway, um, so you brought several of Jane Austen's heroines into different time periods. Who was your favorite Austen heroine to adapt?
Emma.
Was it?
Yeah.
Is that because you found her? I don't remember. You didn't, just easier to adapt? I mean, I know we discussed this to an extent just a minute ago, but
Maybe because she was easier. I mean, I know that 1932 is my most popular book. People
mhm,
like that one the best. I mean, when I look back on it, it was the first book I wrote. When I look back on it, the Elizabeth doesn't really. I mean, I like her, but she doesn't really strike me the way Elizabeth Bennet does in the original novel. Um, I just think, and I guess you could say it's because of the situation sort of dampened her personality a little bit because
yeah,
she has lost. Yeah, I mean, I could rationalize it and say that, but Emma, I have always loved Emma the character,
okay,
and she is. I love her because I've said this before, but she loves fiercely.
mhm,
She makes mistakes all the time and thinks she's the smartest person in the room, but she does learn. If you go back and read
mhm.
Emma real carefully, you can see her
Her
learn from
evolution,
her mistakes and
yeah,
change her. it's sort of similar, and I've talked with this about with Christina and with Claudine, too, about how she's similar in some ways to Mr. Darcy. She has these flaws. She changes them. She acts better. But we give her a lot harder time than we give him. We forgive him, real fast. And with her, I think sometimes people are harder on her. And yeah, she's a snob. Sure, she is. Um,
I don't, but like the new adaptation that they made, I don't, yes, she was snobby, but I felt like they brought her to an all new level. Like she was never quite that bad.
mhm.
That was my one issue with that was,
hmm Well, some of it's the facial expressions, I think, and the
could have
but
been.
if you watch, it's subtle, but if you watch Anya Taylor-Joy over that movie, you can start to see the vulnerabilities start to creep through a little bit, I think. I don't know. That was my take. I really like that adaptation. But I liked them all really. I really love the BBC one, the miniseries,
Oh, is
and
that the
with Johnny Lee Miller and
yeah,
Romola Gary. Is that how you say
Garai, I think. I
it?
that was not, but I it's horrible, but like I watched Atonement and that movie kind of scarred me. And I had a hard time watching movies with Romola Garai and even Benedict Cumberbatch for a long time.
Mhm.
Just their characters were so despicable to me in that movie. And so it kind of carried for a while and I had a
Yeah.
hard time. And I saw that one. That was just maybe it was her. I'll have to go back and rewatch it now that she
Mhm.
doesn't like trigger that
Yeah.
anymore. I was so depressed by the end of that movie.
Mhm. I've not
So
seen it, so
you've not seen it?
no.
Oh
Haven't
no,
read the book.
I
Mm-mm.
don't think I don't remember my husband being with me when I watch it, but every time it comes up, he's like, "Oh," like it just he even has a hard time watching movies like with her, and like for a long time, he's like, "Who is she? She's so familiar," and then he's like, "Oh, she played Bryony." Oh no, no, no! Like
Uh-huh.
it made a difference, and I was like, "Wow." He just, but yeah,
Mhm.
it's well done. It's just one of those movies that's kind of painful.
You're right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure
I
the
got I
book.
got enough pain in my life, man.
Yeah, I'm sure that the book is amazing since the movie
Mhm.
is really good. But yeah, I don't know that I could read it. I think I would bawl the entire time.
Yeah.
I just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
But anyway, um, do you have a favorite time period to write?
Whichever one I'm doing.
Whichever one you're doing.
Yeah. I think that's part of the adventure for me is the time period. It's part of
Okay.
what draws me to write. I mean, like I said, 70s, 80s, 90s, that's easy because I
Yeah.
was young then, I am finding that if I feel like I want to write something from like 2005 on, I don't have the cultural knowledge in the same way because I'm older
Hmm.
than that I do with, the 80s, 90s, maybe early 2000s before I turned 40. But, but
You
yeah.
could also do an older Darcy and Lizzie or whatever
Mhm.
character too, and that would make it a little. Um, I could see that. My daughter sometimes will go, "Mom."
Yeah.
So, just out of curiosity, you have stories that you posted once upon a time online. Do you ever plan to publish those too, or will they stay tucked away somewhere in a corner?
Um, they would need some work, I think, for publication. Are you talking about like D-Day?
Mhm. I always like D-Day. I don't.
Yeah.
I come back to that one sometimes just for fun. I mean, in some ways, you could kind of look at with Pride and Prejudice and some of those, you can see people in them.
hmm
And so I guess with Dee Dee, I mean, I was raised in the South, so
hmm
like Mrs. Darcy, she's this genteel Southern woman, and in some ways there was this secretary at my elementary school. She had almost this sachet when she walked, and I used to
Uh-huh.
walk behind her and try and do it. And I could just,
Uh-huh.
it's just very much like that. And maybe there's a certain amount of the sentimentality to it, but
Yeah.
yeah, I always liked that one.
Yeah, I have taken a couple of the short stories that I did and made them like as a freebie for my people who sign up for my newsletter. You know,
Hmm.
they can choose, different ones like
Hmm.
the Nightmare on Grosvenor Street, the
I can't
Halloween one,
remember one. Yeah, it's
and
been a long time since I read some of the shorts.
a Meet Cute that takes place in Seattle, and um, I think the Christmas scene from
D-Day.
no,
Uh,
yeah, I think that was from that.
well, that was a separate one too. Like, or you separated it out. I don't. I'm trying to
I think I
remember.
wrote it later. I think I wrote it's called Holiday Day.
Mhm.
but yeah, D-Day it's possible, but it would need some work. And then the other one I guess is Elizabeth Doe.
Like,
Know the
you look
main
all like,
person?
I actually, when I was having trouble, a lot of trouble, I was skimming back over old like things that from forever ago, and I think I skimmed back over both of them because I just couldn't read anything new. I didn't have it in me when I was injured. So,
Hmm.
so yeah, but that I think that's another one. I don't remember. I think those might be the only two left, aren't they?
Yeah, that those are the only two left. I do have about 30 to 40% of a story written about Mrs. Darcy from D-Day,
Oh, cool.
about her. It's almost like a women's fiction piece. So someday I'll finish that.
Well, I mean, you didn't go much into her backstory, and that's in
Mhm.
D-Day, but you do get a little bit of it. So she did sound interesting, especially because the grandmother, as I recall, even mentions a few things from
Mhm.
way back when.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I like her a lot. Anne, Anne Darcy.
Yeah.
So yeah, she's a widow. So it goes back to it has a lot of it has to do with the time around when her husband died and her grief and, moving
Hmm.
on from that. And she's older, she's close to 50. Um, so, and then, her being able to, could she find love again? Maybe not.
Hmm.
Maybe that's the only man for her. And,
Yeah.
so anyway, I mean, it's rough, not completely developed, but I go back to it every once in a while.
Okay, that was going to be my next thing. So you'll write something for a while and then move on to something else and
Mhm.
kind of swap back and forth.
Yeah, that's why I write really well. Two things. I work full time.
Right.
So, there's not a lot of time, but I also write pretty slowly. Um, Not as fast as successful writers write, I don't think. And I mean, it's not that I have to have the muse to be able to write. I can sit down and write something,
Hmm.
and make myself do it. A lot of it has to do with time. But then I'll go back and I'll think, no, I don't want to do that, or I'll sit and plot in my head for a long time.
Hmm.
What's this going to look like, or what? And then I'll write some things, and then I'll go back and like, no, I don't like that. I'll put that in. I have like in Scrivener, I have a trash file, or like a miscellaneous file where I
Yeah.
write something. I'm like, wow, that's really good, but it doesn't fit. We'll just stick it in there and maybe I can use it somewhere else sometime or later in the book or whatever. So,
Yeah, I usually have like a notes document and I'll take it and copy and paste it and put it in there. And then that
mhm,
way, that worked really well with one of mine. I had way too much in the middle and I cut a bunch out and then it ended up being my blog tour posts.
mhm.
So yeah, sometimes they
Yeah,
come in
yeah, I've
handy
done
to
that
have
too.
it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, well, I'm kind of an odd, I guess like I said, I don't write fast and I don't have a lot of time to write. So I can either read or write. So sometimes that'll slow me down because I'll be reading instead of writing. I can't seem to do both very much at the same time.
Yeah.
But I have summer break, because I work at a school. So I have summer break and I have Christmas break and spring break and fall break. And I do a lot of writing during that time.
Yeah.
So
So the what do you read when you get to read? Just out of curiosity.
I I do read some Jaff, especially the authors that I like. I
Hmm.
read romance in general, historical, some contemporary. Like I like Nora Roberts,
Hmm.
and sometimes I'll read nonfiction. I'll read history. Like I read a book about Thomas Mayer. Anyway, the governor of Montana back in the 1800s. That was real interesting. Or I'll read John Adams, or something like that.
What made you read about the former governor of Montana?
Because I had a story in my head about
Oh, okay.
in that took place in the West when they were
Okay.
settling the West, and so I wanted to read about it. And somebody, it just, I don't know, this book came across my path, and I read it, and it was really interesting.
It just seemed without that backstory, it seemed like a rather random selection.
I'm
You
pretty
know?
random. I'm pretty random. I'm a random reader, that's for sure. That's for sure.
Oh, yeah. No, do you find like I know when I'm writing, I find I can't read something like when I'm writing Regency, I can't read Regency while I'm writing it. So I don't know how much other people are that way as well, but I know.
Mhm.
So I would.
Yeah. I'm kind of that way too. I have to be reading something a little bit different, or it has to
Mhm.
be, research for. I love to have a project, and so I'll do um, research, read something as part of my project.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
All right.
So
Is there anything else you wanted to talk about?
I don't know. I don't think so. I have really enjoyed these interviews. Have I
Yeah, this
think
is
I
fun.
think it has been really good, and we have one, maybe two more um, scheduled, and we can do more. After
Yeah.
even after that, but that'll take us into the beginning part of June. But I just think it's so interesting because authors ask different questions
Yeah.
than just like a regular interviewer would, a typical interviewer would. So I think it's been really great for me to see everybody's. So,
Yeah, I think they've been fun. I haven't gotten to see all of them, but the ones that I've seen have been a lot of fun. Especially just, I don't know, just different dynamics. I mean, we could even swap it around because different people would even ask different questions.
yeah,
Someone asked you totally different questions, probably,
yeah,
especially given background, like what I've read of yours versus if someone who may have read more of your newer work would ask
mhm,
different, more, be better for that particular.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But I think they've all been good, and everybody's
Yeah.
been really great about getting them recorded, and it's been a lot of fun. I think that the listeners and readers are enjoying it too. So
Yeah.
anyway.